No one expected Letitia James to take that kind of hit in silence, especially not from Marjorie Taylor Greene. But as the cameras clicked on, the congresswoman from Georgia leaned into her mic with the smug confidence of someone convinced the floor already belonged to her. "Mr. Chairman," she said, sharp as a blade dulled from overuse, "before we begin praising legacies and law degrees, I think it's only fair we ask why the Attorney General of New York filed estate papers 13 years late for a man she claimed was her father, but listed as her legal spouse." The room stilled, a flicker of confusion sweeping through the aides and committee members. Phones lifted, eyebrows raised. Letitia sat still, hands folded, expression unreadable. C-SPAN was rolling. Reporters in the back had stopped mid-scribble. Greene pressed on, louder now. "This is not a clerical error," she snapped. "This is a calculated maneuver to gain property through inheritance law. A top prosecutor playing legal dress-up to claim a deed." She paused dramatically. If any Republican had done this, they'd be under indictment before sunrise. Some murmurs started. Letitia didn't blink. Not yet. Then, finally, she leaned forward. No raised voice, no indignant flailing, just a clear, measured tone. "Is the gentlewoman finished?" Greene smirked but didn't reply. Letitia continued. "Since we're opening the floor to probate law and character assassinations, I'd like to respond with some facts. The documents in question were filed in accordance with New York State inheritance protocols. The classification, tenancy in common, was used to correct a title error from 1994, not to gain any undue financial benefit." She looked Greene dead in the eye. "You can check the court filings. They're public." Greene folded her arms, but her fingers tapped, restless. Letitia opened a slim folder. "While we're speaking of transparency," she said, flipping the first page, "I'd like to shift the committee's attention to $129,870 in campaign expenditures routed from the Freedom Rising PAC to a consulting firm listed at a vacant lot in Cobb County." A low rustle moved through the hearing room. Greene's smile faltered. Letitia didn't stop. "The firm, Oak Star Strategies, has no active business license, no employees, and no digital footprint outside of a payment processing shell that links back to your former treasurer." Greene leaned forward. "You're deflecting. That trip was cleared." "This isn't about Idaho yet," Letitia replied. "We'll get to the 5-star lodging, private flights, and your so-called strategy sessions in Coeur d'Alene in a moment." Committee members shifted. Someone coughed. Even the chairman leaned forward now. Letitia adjusted her posture but didn't raise her voice. "If public funds, direct or laundered, are subsidizing luxury travel for private gain, that's not politics. That's fraud." Greene's tone sharpened. "You're twisting facts. This is a witch hunt." Letitia's reply came like ice water. "Then why does the paper trail read like a blueprint?" The air changed. People felt it. The first round had ended, and Letitia hadn't even touched the next page. When she finally did, she paused, letting the silence breathe. "This isn't just about money," she said. "It's about what's said behind closed doors when no one thinks the cameras are rolling." Then, quietly but unmistakably, she added, "And I have transcripts." The words dropped like a gavel. Greene's jaw clenched. "Transcripts of what?" she snapped. Letitia looked up. "Phone calls," she said plainly. 2 calls, one in March, one in July, both detailing how Passy money was rerouted to purchase a beachfront property in Flagler Beach, Florida, through a holding company linked to your brother-in-law. A sharp gasp broke the room's composure. Greene slammed her hand on the desk. "You're lying." But the silence that followed wasn't buying it, and Letitia James hadn't even broken a sweat. "This is fiction, manufactured. It was the kind of line you throw when your hands are empty, but your ego demands an encore." Letitia James didn't even blink. She calmly slid a crisp document down the table toward the committee clerk as if she were delivering a lunch order, then addressed the chairman without turning to face Greene. "For the record, I've submitted the transcripts to be added to the official hearing file. They've been vetted by 2 independent legal sources, both of whom verified authenticity before I even considered reading them aloud. That's what professionals do, Congresswoman." At this point, Greene looked less like a firebrand and more like a candle left too close to the sun, melting fast and flaring in all the wrong places. She whipped her head left and right, scanning for backup. None came. Her own party bench sat motionless, studying their phones with the reverence of monks avoiding sin. From the press row, a reporter mouthed, "Oh my God," to her colleague, already mid-tweet. Letitia cleared her throat, flipped the top sheet of her folder, and read with clinical precision. In the March 9th call, one of Representative Greene's aides mentions rerouting $20,000 from the Freedom Rising PAC into a Florida-based LLC account, Bay Rise Investments, registered under the name of Ronald Edgerton. She paused, then added with dry gravity, "That would be your brother-in-law, Ronald, married to your husband's sister, Kendra, in case you forgot the guest list to your own 4th of July barbecue." A breathless silence spread across the room like smoke. Then Greene stood, red-faced and trembling. "This is slander. I don't even have a brother-in-law." Letitia raised a single eyebrow and held up the next page. The Florida Division of Corporations would disagree. Bay Rise Investments was incorporated exactly 61 days before the wire transfer, and the registrant address matches Mr. Edgerton's home in Volusia County. "Shall I go on?" The room didn't just stir, it pivoted. One of Greene's aides quietly slipped out the side door and another began texting with the urgency of someone ordering a last-minute plane ticket out of Washington. "You're a liar," Greene barked, pointing furiously. "A bold-faced, media-hungry liar." Letitia exhaled, slow and precise. "Then explain the bank report," she said. "Explain why the transfer was flagged for suspicious activity. Explain why a fraud investigation was quietly opened and then closed 2 weeks later with no public filing, because either the banks are lying or you thought no one would notice. Unfortunately for you, I did." The chairman looked like he was about to speak, but Letitia cut in before the gavel could fall. "We don't need a recess," she said. "We need answers." She opened another page. In July, a separate call with a San Diego developer, same PAC, same shell company, $50,000 marked as a consulting fee under the heading of security advisement. The developer, however, confirmed no contract, no meetings, and no communication. I called him myself. He was quite clear. The chairman's mouth opened, but no words emerged. It was the kind of silence that made careers tremble. Letitia turned toward him. "Mr. Chairman, these aren't accusations. They are documented financial transactions backed by public filings and first-hand corroboration. If we, the so-called representatives of the people, refuse to investigate this, then we are not a hearing. We are a farce." She stood and let her gaze sweep the room. The press gallery was already halfway through writing tomorrow's headlines. Greene, once the proud demolition ball of the chamber, now looked like the wreckage. Her face flushed, lips tight, hands frozen. Letitia calmly picked up a slimmer file. The cover read, Private Travel Disbursements, 2021 to 2023. She lifted it with the same ease one might use to lift a velvet hammer. "Let's talk about the trips," she said, eyes locking on Greene's. The ones labeled as strategic meetings that somehow always seem to take place in five-star resorts, coincidentally surrounded by private donors, real estate brokers, and, oddly enough, cryptocurrency investors operating out of Scottsdale, Arizona. Greene let out a short, humorless laugh. "Crypto? Are you serious?" "Oh, now I am," Letitia answered, flipping the page. "Because I don't think the American people elected you to play crypto Barbie at the Phoenician on someone else's dime while calling it policy development." A few aides bit their lips. The chairman leaned back, either stunned or strategizing. Letitia pressed on. "April 2022. You were flown to Scottsdale on a private jet, tail number N549TW, owned by a company called Orbit Holdings. The owner, Leonard March, is, wait for it, currently under IRS investigation for international wire fraud." She paused. "And yet, there you were, 3 nights, full suite, all paid by Mr. March, not listed on your financial disclosures, not once." The room no longer breathed. Greene shifted slightly, lips pressed so tight it looked like she was trying to swallow her own temper. Letitia didn't blink, because this wasn't improvisation. This was excavation, and she had only just begun digging. The name landed like a brick in a glass house. "Orbit Holdings," Letitia said, letting it echo. That was all it took. Phones came up, notes scribbled. People in the gallery leaned forward as if they could smell blood. "You stayed 3 nights in a luxury suite," she continued, tapping the invoice. "Paid in full by Orbit, and somehow not a single mention of it appears in your financial disclosures. Not once." Greene's cheek twitched, a small tell from someone used to hiding bigger lies. "That's not mine to disclose," she muttered. "He offered to stay. I didn't pay for it." "Exactly," Letitia replied, folding her hands like a judge about to issue sentencing. "Which is the problem. Accepting unreported gifts from an individual under active federal investigation while serving on the Oversight Committee is not just bad optics, it's unethical, and, depending on your calendar entries, possibly criminal." The chairman glanced up from his notes, then down again, like a man trying not to inhale smoke. No one dared interrupt. Letitia turned another page. May 2023. Sedona, another private flight. This one chartered by donors tied directly to Westbridge Energy, an oil lobbying firm based in Dallas. She didn't need to raise her voice. The gravity did that for her. 2 of those donors had active cases pending before the Environmental Affairs Subcommittee, the same subcommittee where you voted against enforcement amendments 3 weeks later. If the Orbit invoice had caused murmurs, this one dropped like a cinder block in the well of the chamber. "Stop it, Greene." The voice came from somewhere in her own row, shaky, low, a colleague maybe, trying to save them both. "Now you're twisting everything. You know how this works. Members get offers. We make appearances. This is normal." Letitia raised her hand, gently. "Not for drama, for clarity." "It's not the appearance," she said. "It's the pattern. The same names, same jets, same luxury hotels, and no disclosures." She stepped away from the mic, walking slowly across the front of the dais like a prosecutor pacing the courtroom. Her voice dropped just slightly, less formal now, more human. "Let me ask you something, Congresswoman. Why did you meet with Nicholas Avril, CEO of Westbridge, 3 weeks after voting against the Clean Water Accountability Act. That vote killed the very amendment that would have restricted runoff exemptions for firms like his. I didn't meet him, Greene said, blinking hard. Letitia didn't smirk. She didn't have to. She nodded toward the clerk. You were photographed with him on the terrace at El Encanto. The photo was posted, then deleted. The clerk slid the screenshot across the table. There it was. Greene in sunglasses, grinning beside a man with a whiskey glass and a lapel badge that read Nicholas A. It traveled around the room like a spark in dry grass. You didn't know the camera was watching? Letitia said. But the internet never forgets. Greene opened her mouth, then shut it, then again. She reached for her water but didn't drink. She held the glass like it might protect her. Letitia let the silence speak. This isn't about partisanship, she said. It's about trust. You built your brand by screaming about corruption, about swamp creatures and secret deals. You told Americans you were the one who couldn't be bought. She tilted her head. So what happens when the receipts show otherwise? No one answered. They didn't need to. Outside the hearing room, the internet was already writing its own conclusions. Greene had built a persona on confrontation. Louder, sharper, more defiant than anyone else in the building. But now, under the lights, boxed in by documents and silence, her defiance looked more like flinching. The meltdown came in fragments. Her fingers, once balled in fists, began tapping, a frantic Morse code only she understood. Her eyes flicked left, right, desperately scanning for someone, anyone, to jump in. But this time, no cavalry. "This is a damn ambush!" she finally shouted, standing so quickly her chair screeched across the marble. "This entire hearing is a setup. Where's the due process, huh? Where's the fairness?" The chairman began. "Congresswoman Greene, please." "No," she snapped. "I'm not going to sit here while some activist in a blazer reads off lies written by God knows who." She pointed at Letitia, hand trembling. "You want your moment, James? This is all performance." Letitia, still at her podium, raised her eyes. "I've given names, records, filings, photos, time-stamped documents. Nothing I've said is speculative." "You just don't like the mirror being held up," Greene hissed. "No," Letitia answered evenly. "I'm finally standing in line, and I'm not moving." There was nothing dramatic in her tone. No shouting, no flourish. It was the kind of statement that cut straight to the gut, because it was calm, cold, and entirely believable. An aide attempted to slip Greene a note. She batted it away. "Why don't you talk about what your donors are doing, huh?" she screamed, desperate now. "Talk about your side's dark money." Letitia didn't flinch, but she didn't need to. The damage was already in motion, and the next folder waiting in her hand wasn't any thinner. "Talk about all the dark money behind your campaign, Letitia. You think you're clean? You think you're some kind of hero?" It was a last-ditch swing, the kind you throw when the floor's already buckling beneath your feet. Letitia didn't blink. "I'm not here to perform," she said, her tone so even it felt rehearsed, but it wasn't. "I'm here to ask the questions the public has been screaming into voicemail boxes for years, and every time you yell, every time you deflect, you answer them for me." The chairman made a soft attempt. "Let's restore order to the hearing." But Greene wasn't finished. Of course not. "You want drama? Fine, here it is," she barked, slamming her hand down on the table like it owed her an apology. "I have nothing to hide. Nothing. unlike the rest of you fake reformers who smile for the cameras and lie behind the scenes." Letitia tilted her head slightly, the way a lawyer does when a hostile witness just walked into their own trap. "The third account," she said, "was opened under your name, Congresswoman, through Atlantic East Solutions, LLC. That account is tied to a short-term rental in Tampa, which, coincidentally, began receiving PAC deposits shortly after your vote against rental regulation reform." The words hit like steel. No yelling, just facts, stacked and sealed. This time, Greene didn't speak. No roaring defense, no hissed insult, just silence. The sound of a woman doing the math and realizing the decimals no longer align in her favor. Her hands, once flailing, now sat motionless on the table. For the first time, she looked tired, not drained, exposed. Outside the room, the story had already escaped its handlers. Cable networks had cut away from whatever filler they were airing. The video feed had gone viral before Letitia even reached for her water. People weren't just watching anymore. They were dissecting, cheering, panicking, recording reaction videos, and text blasting friends. The hearing had left the chamber and bled into America's bloodstream. Inside, the mood had shifted. What started as theater was now closer to a deposition. You could see it in the way the committee members sat straighter, their pens hovering over blank pages that were no longer props. They weren't just present now. They were worried. Letitia didn't say another word. She didn't have to. She quietly closed the folder in front of her, took a sip of water, and let the silence do its work. Greene, meanwhile, was reduced to fumes, anger no longer her weapon, but a symptom. And fear, unlike rage, doesn't perform well on camera. The chairman recessed the hearing 15 minutes early, dropping the gavel like it was hot. Members exited with the stunned urgency of people walking away from a wreck they didn't witness, but now had to explain. The chaos wasn't contained to the room anymore. It was pouring into corridors, elevators, inboxes, and spin rooms. Letitia stood. No rush, no sound bites. 3 different aides tried to coax a statement from her in the hallway. She declined, politely but firmly. "Not yet," was all she said. Down the corridor, Marjorie Taylor Greene was pacing like a prize fighter whose corner had thrown in the towel too late. No cameras, just raised voices and the slamming realization that rage without a strategy is just noise. "You don't let some AG from New York come in here and smear me like that," she snapped at her aide, a tall man with sharp eyes and a phone that never stopped vibrating. This was a setup. Someone's feeding her. "I want names." "We're drafting the response now," he replied. "Usual playbook, political weaponization, deep state, selective editing. Should we push it out now or after Tucker?" "Do it now," she snapped. "And tell Tucker I'm coming on tonight. No makeup notes. Just give me a chair and a mic." 10 minutes later, Letitia walked past a group of staffers who were whispering the way people do when they think they're safe. She didn't meet anyone's eyes, except one. A young black intern, probably 19, maybe 20, held her gaze for just a second too long. It wasn't admiration, it was gratitude. Letitia nodded gently and kept moving. 2 floors up, in a quieter hallway, Representative Alan Dorsey, a moderate Democrat from Oregon, was already on the phone. "We've got to distance," he said flatly. "I don't care what she means to the base. This thing is going nuclear." "You think her files are legit?" the voice on the line asked. "She read them too clean." "That wasn't theater," Dorsey muttered. "That was muscle memory." Outside on Independence Avenue, the press corps had metastasized. Lapel mics were clipped, Cameras were rolling. Countdowns had begun. CNN correspondents rehearsed intros like they were opening a documentary. Everyone wanted a piece of the wreckage. Inside a tucked-away side room, Greene sat hunched over a table with her comms director and a lawyer whose face looked like it had aged 10 years since breakfast. Her tone had changed. The fire was gone, replaced by calculation and something resembling dread. "What's worst case?" she asked, not looking up. The comms director hesitated. The lawyer cleared his throat. And somewhere down the hallway, Letitia James was still standing. The lawyer, older, seasoned, his salt and pepper beard betraying decades of watching clients implode, cleared his throat. "If James's documents are authentic, and if she pushes for a formal ethics inquiry, we're not just talking censure." He looked directly at Greene. "We're talking FEC violations, potential IRS audits, and if DOJ catches wind, wire fraud, conflict of interest, public corruption. All of it's in play now." Greene didn't respond. Not a twitch, not a blink. Just stared at the conference table like it might offer a trap door. "What about the base?" the comms director asked, scanning polling data like it was scripture. "We'll keep them," Greene said flatly. "They don't care about LLCS or tail numbers. They care that I fight." The lawyer glanced sideways. "They care until it looks like you lied. And right now, it looks like you lied with receipts." A few doors down, tucked in a plain side room, Letitia James sat quietly with her chief of staff, stirring a cup of coffee that had given up being hot hours ago. "You know they're going to say this was a takedown," her aide said. "They'll call you a puppet, a plant, Soros-funded, or some other lazy nonsense." Letitia smiled faintly, but her voice held weight. "They can say whatever they want. When I go home, I'll be able to look people in the eye and say one thing clearly. I told the truth, and I told it with receipts." But truth was only part of the equation. Greene wasn't playing by truth's rules anymore, and by the time the hearing resumed the next morning, the battlefield had changed. It wasn't a committee hearing now. It was political theater, blood sport, with satellite trucks lined up along Independence Avenue like military artillery. Every cable news network had gone full crimson banner. Greene under fire. James unleashes files. Was it all a lie? Inside the hearing room, seats were filled an hour early. Reporters shoulder to shoulder, phones recording non-stop, members arriving with faces drawn and phones glued to trembling hands. Letitia walked in with a manila folder tucked under her arm and the kind of calm that unsettles guilty people. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't posing. She didn't need to be. Greene hadn't spoken publicly since her meltdown the day before. Today, she arrived in a sharper suit, fresh makeup, and a new expression. Cold, composed, but with the undercurrent of someone who'd spent the night barking into mirrors. The chairman gave the floor to Letitia, and she stood, wasting not a second. "Yesterday, I presented receipts tied to campaign irregularities and unreported gifts, but there is one final document I waited to verify before submission. Now that it's confirmed, I believe the committee and the public deserves to see it." She placed the folder on the table and opened it with deliberate care. "This," she said, holding up the first page, "is a draft agreement between Representative Greene and a Nevada-based investment group, Ridge Hill Partners." Chairs creaked, brows lifted, audible gasps floated through the room like smoke from a slow fire. Letitia continued, steady and surgical. "This document is dated February 2nd, 2023, 2 weeks before Congresswoman Greene introduced legislation aimed at lowering capital gains taxes on private energy holdings. Within this agreement is a provision outlining her continued legislative support for deregulation policies in exchange for undisclosed financial equity in Horizon Aggregate Ventures, a subsidiary firm with fracking interests across the Midwest. Greene shot to her feet, her voice rising. "That's a fake. That's not even my signature." Letitia didn't flinch. "We had it analyzed by an independent forensic handwriting expert. The signature matches 5 separate documents filed with the Georgia Secretary of State." A reporter in the back leaned to his colleague and whispered what everyone else was thinking. "That's game." But Letitia wasn't finished. This deal was never disclosed. The legislation never passed. But that doesn't change what this is: a written agreement to trade influence for personal enrichment. The room collapsed into a silence so dense it felt structural. Not reverent, not shocked, just stuck. Like everyone was afraid to be the first to move. One of Greene's lawyers leaned in and whispered something. She recoiled, visibly shaken. "You don't know what you're doing," she muttered, her voice cracking. "You're burning the whole house down." "For what? A headline?" Letitia's reply was soft, but it rang like a bell. "No." For accountability, the chairman leaned forward. "Representative James, are you formally requesting that this document be submitted to the House Ethics Committee?" Letitia nodded. "Yes, along with the full binder of supporting records, all of which have been uploaded to a secure congressional server and are now available to every committee member in this room." The clerk approached and collected the folder, while cameras kept rolling and silence carried more weight than words. Outside, the world was already watching. But now, for the first time, it was listening. A camera shutter snapped just outside the chamber. Within seconds, social media was flooding with reactions. Some stunned, some gleeful, all immediate. In living rooms, airport lounges, waiting rooms, people were watching in real time as a woman who had built her brand on righteous fury suddenly went mute in front of the one thing she never expected: a folder of well-organized facts. Even conservative anchors struggled to defend her without sounding like parodies of themselves. Back inside, Marjorie Taylor Greene lowered herself into her seat like it was a witness stand. Her hands didn't move. Her face didn't flinch. Something had shifted. Something deeper than anger, more permanent than embarrassment. This wasn't about being shouted down anymore. It was about legal exposure, career exposure, and the worst part? She didn't know what else Letitia James had in that folder. By mid-afternoon, the headlines were inescapable. MSNBC, Fox, CNN, local stations from Boise to Shreveport. It didn't matter. The scrolls were red, the chyrons breathless. Greene under fire. Letitia drops the hammer. Frack money fallout. Everyone had a headline. But what made it dangerous was that this time, the audience wasn't just reading. They were arguing in diners, whispering in church pews, shaking heads in barbershops and break rooms. Hashtags ignited like dry timber. Number James exposes Greene, number PAC Gate, and number Marjorie meltdown trended within an hour. One clip, just 10 seconds, of Greene slamming her hands on the desk went viral with the caption, "When receipts hit harder than rants." In Shreveport, Louisiana, a barber named Curtis paused mid-fade and muttered to the room, "Man, she cooked her." That ain't politics, that's malpractice. At a diner in Cedar Rapids, 2 retired teachers, lifelong conservatives, stared at the TV above the cash register. "She looked guilty," one said. "Didn't even deny it," said the other. "Just tried yelling. Didn't work this time." It was that kind of moment. the kind that bypasses the think pieces and goes straight to people's instincts. You didn't have to be a Democrat to feel it. You just had to have a functioning sense of smell. And what they smelled wasn't politics. It was rot. Letitia James didn't gloat, didn't grin. But by nightfall, she was a household name. Clips of her composure were everywhere. One tweet read, "If Grace under pressure had a face, it'd be Letitia James." TikTok took her line. "I told the truth, and I told it with receipts," and remixed it over a bass drop. Even teenagers who thought the House Oversight Committee was a Netflix series were suddenly quoting her. Cable news tried to catch up. Some pundits strained to recast the hearing as political warfare. But it didn't stick. The documents were too specific, the answers too plain, the silence from Greene's camp too damning. Even in friendly districts, cracks were showing. At a town hall in Grand Junction, Colorado, a woman in a green 2022 hoodie raised her hand and asked a question her congressman couldn't dodge. If the PAC money story was fake, why hasn't she said so? Why is she hiding? Talk radio lit up. Some callers defended Greene. Most didn't. "She used to fight for us," one man from Wichita said. "Now it looks like she was fighting for her second home in Tampa." Online, right-wing influencers scrambled. A few tried the usual script. Old tweets, out-of-context video, feigned outrage. But Letitia hadn't yelled. She hadn't attacked. She just read aloud. And you can't slap down a document. The pushback landed like foam darts against steel. Inside Congress, the phone lines lit up. Demands for Greene's resignation. Demands for an investigation. Some calls just asked, "Is this real?" The Speaker's office gave no comment, but insiders leaked the obvious. A closed-door conversation had already happened, and it wasn't friendly. Whispers of censure hung in the air like the smell of scorched ambition. Through it all, Letitia said nothing. No press tour, no victory lap, just one quiet post on her official website thanking her constituents and reaffirming her commitment to transparency. It was short, it was boring, and it was louder than a dozen interviews. Because while Greene's team scrambled to scrub the mess, Letitia didn't need to speak. The public was already doing it for her. But as the noise rose, so did the pressure. By day 3, Greene's office looked less like a congressional suite and more like a panic room. The blinds stayed shut. The phones rang non-stop. Staffers whispered in corners like they were plotting an escape route. Her chief of staff, red-eyed and twitchy, stood at the copier hammering buttons like it owed him a miracle. "Is she coming in?" one aide whispered. No one answered. But down the hall, they all knew. The game had changed, and Marjorie Taylor Greene no longer knew the rules. "She's still in the conference room," an aide murmured. On the phone with legal again. Inside, Marjorie Taylor Greene sat hunched over a speakerphone, ringed by printouts, half-drained coffee cups, and 3 exhausted staffers who looked like they had aged a year in a day. Her attorney's voice crackled through the line, firm and dry. "She's not backing down. She's holding the line. But she's doing it dangerously smart. No sound bites, no stunts, just verified evidence. That's a problem. That's dangerous." Greene rubbed her forehead. "So what do I do?" "You don't resign," he replied. "But you also don't go live again. Every time you talk, you bleed. We need a statement, carefully crafted." Greene shook her head. "I don't do careful." The lawyer didn't flinch. "You do now." Across the Capitol cafeteria, 2 junior aides swapped glances over untouched lunch trays. One leaned in, whispered, "She used to be loud." The other nodded. Now she's quiet. That's when it's real. Meanwhile, Letitia James wasn't touring cable sets or pitching memoirs. She was answering emails. That Friday, back in her district office, she sat in a folding chair beside a group of senior residents voicing housing complaints. One woman mentioned a broken elevator. Letitia took notes. "Don't you get tired?" her aide asked as they walked out. "I'm always tired," she said with a faint smile. "But I'm not done." Back in Washington, the gears of accountability, so often rusted shut, began to grind. A bipartisan group within the committee started reviewing the documents James submitted. Normally, that process takes months. This time, it took days. One by one, Greene's allies peeled away. Some issued vague platitudes about letting the facts play out. Others bolted entirely, ducking reporters like fire alarms were going off. Only the fringe remained, shouting "Deep State," claiming Letitia was a Soros puppet, insisting the documents were forged. Not one could prove it. Not one tried. By the end of the week, 3 Republican members discreetly requested an internal ethics review. That wasn't a crack in the wall. It was a hole. Her own party was backing away. Greene's eventual response came in a typed statement. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just one more accusation. This time that Letitia James was weaponizing Congress to smear true patriots. But the air had already shifted. Editorial boards from coast to coast weren't debating partisanship. They were writing about character, about credibility, about the idea that maybe, just maybe, truth still mattered. And in Greene's own district, a local poll showed her approval rating had cratered, down 20 points in just 7 days. At a Rotary Club in Macon, Georgia, a former donor stood up and addressed the room. "I don't care what party you are. If you lie to the people and get caught, you don't deserve to represent them." This wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. Greene's office looked like a bunker now, staffers whispered. Donors stopped returning calls. Lobbyists suddenly had prior engagements. The walls were still painted congressional blue, but it felt like the lights had dimmed. Meanwhile, Letitia kept moving. Methodical, grounded. No gloating, no press blitz. She hadn't toppled Greene with insults or headlines. She'd done it with paperwork, with quiet tenacity, with the kind of poise that made even her opponents pause. But the real story wasn't what happened to Greene. The real story was what Congress and the public would do with what they had just witnessed. By month's end, the media frenzy cooled, but the questions got sharper. The moment refused to fade. In churches, cafes, school board meetings, people were still talking. What they saw wasn't drama. It was discipline, a rare spectacle of restraint. From Akron to Anaheim, the same sentiment repeated. She didn't yell. She didn't deflect. She just showed the truth. At a community center in Ohio, a pastor stood before his congregation and said, "Integrity doesn't need to raise its voice. Loud doesn't mean right. And truth, it doesn't need to shout." Letitia didn't hire a new publicist. She didn't go on every talk show. She chose a quiet sit-down with a local journalist in New York. The interview was simple, focused. "Did you intend this to be a takedown?" the reporter asked. "No," Letitia said plainly. "I just followed the evidence." And this time, the country followed with her. "I wanted people to see what happens when you follow the trail," Letitia said. "I wanted them to understand that real power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from being prepared." The journalist nodded slowly. "Are you worried about retaliation?" "I'm aware of it," Letitia replied. "But I'm not worried. I didn't do this to win a fight. I did it because people deserve better than smoke and mirrors. That phrase, smoke and mirrors, stuck. It echoed through Capitol Hill like a closing gavel. Within 48 hours, the House Ethics Committee opened a formal inquiry into Marjorie Taylor Greene's campaign finances. There was no press conference, no grandstanding, just a one-line bulletin. Her records were now under official review. The storm hadn't passed. It had simply moved indoors. Lawyers came in. Staffers quietly left. Flights were canceled. Statements were pending. Greene, once a fixture on every primetime panel, began declining interviews. There were no more sound bites, only silence and strategy. Meanwhile, Letitia's influence spread without effort. Universities reached out, not for headlines, but for wisdom. Georgetown, Howard, Berkeley. She always brought the same message. Don't confuse loud with right. Do your homework. Never walk into a room afraid of the facts. Letters arrived by the dozens, some from high school girls who saw in her not just strength, but permission. The permission to be prepared, to be quiet, to be right. A voter in Michigan wrote, "You said what we've all been thinking, that politics doesn't have to be a circus, and maybe, just maybe, truth still matters." One night, Letitia took the stage at a packed town hall in Garland, Texas. No signs, no chants, just people, black, white, Latino, young, old, waiting not for a performance, but for an answer. She stepped to the mic. "I'm not here to talk about scandals or headlines," she began. "I'm here to talk about what comes next, because what happened in that hearing wasn't about one person. It was about what we allow in our politics, whether we still care enough to stop and ask, is this honest? Is this fair? Is this who we want to be?" She let the silence settle, not awkwardly, but like a challenge. Then she added, "Power without truth is just noise. And we've had enough noise." The applause didn't explode. It built, slow, steady, the kind that meant people weren't just clapping. They were agreeing. Later that night, Letitia sat alone at her kitchen table. The binder from the hearing was still in her bag. She hadn't opened it since. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. And, more importantly, so did everyone else. Because truth, when spoken clearly and without fear, doesn't just win arguments. It shifts the culture. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in facts, in integrity, and in holding the powerful accountable. And remember, when the noise gets louder, double-check who brought the receipts. This is Letitia James, and this time the record speaks for itself.